Jan, I need to ask you something.
Yes,
This is very important.
yes,
Jeremiah,
yeah.
tell me about him.
He was a bullfrog,
Okay,
and he was a good friend of mine.
I
I
heard
never
tell.
understood a single word he said.
Jan's here, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hi everyone. Yeah, we're so excited to have Jan with us for the first of many
Woo.
future times. We wanted to do it on a really special occasion. So F This Movie Week celebrating the films of 1983 seemed like a perfect fit. And we teed it up to Jan as our guest to make the selection of which movie we're going to discuss. So
Yeah.
Jan, they could probably tell from the title on the video,
Yeah.
but for those of you who just click blindly, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about The Big Chill, and I chose it because I am a natural woman. So,
So Jan, I want to tee this up to you first because I was talking to my parents about this movie after I watched it, and I said, when I do the video, I don't want to pretend like I was there and have firsthand knowledge of the Big Chill as a phenomenon, and I don't want to presuppose the feelings and the agita of late 60s college students. So for historical context and like your feet being on the ground in 83 when this movie came out,
yeah.
what does this movie mean to you?
All right. So, first of all, I hadn't watched it in years, and but I practically know it by heart. When we were watching the movie, I was struck first by just how many things that my husband JB and I say to each other that are straight from this movie. So that means we've been repeating these lines since we were in college. I was at college in 83. So that part of the Big Chill experience, that it's these baby boomers talking, about 15 years after they graduate. I First of all, I'm the last generation of baby boomer.
Mhm.
Um, and I fall into sort of a weird cusp as to how I identify, but I was definitely raised as a baby boomer.
Mhm.
Um, so I had that relevance. I had the in college, just about to graduate at the time relevance. The music I thought was terrific, and really that movie and its soundtrack just sparked this super impactful resurgence of Motown music, which became sort of the soundtrack of a lot of college parties that I attended.
Nice.
Um, all those actors are terrific. So I'm a huge Kevin Kline fan for one. So yeah, there were just a lot of impactful things at the time that really affected me about the movie.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Motown music kind of coming back as a result of the movie because I don't remember that as part of the Big Chill experience, but I remember, especially as the 80s went on, that movies like Good Morning Vietnam or like that was the one that really stuck out to me where like I would listen to that in the car all the time when I was a kid. And yeah, Motown music was as current to me as current popular music. It was just so ubiquitous everywhere.
Exactly. And I really think that this soundtrack, as a soundtrack, I mean, it charted. So it had a huge impact. I don't know that there were a lot of movies to that time where the soundtrack was its own thing.
So you mentioned, Jan, you mentioned the movie like being a big part of your college experience. Were you guys all at college like cosplaying as Big Chill characters? Like, was everybody in
Absolutely.
like Kevin Kline's running shorts? You know, like was everyone
Those
is that
tiny
kind of
little running
tiny
shorts
little
that could
running
have.
shorts? Is that what was going on there?
I was fascinated to watch The Big Chill now because over the years, two things had happened. One is for some reason I had it in my head that all it was 2 hours of people dancing in a kitchen. Or like I thought that they would get to the living room and then just stay there like My Dinner with Andre and just talk in the
Right.
living room. So I thought that, and I was surprised that it wasn't that. And
Like
then
boomers
also
talking.
just boomers talking. And then also my defenses were a little up at the beginning of the movie, and it took time for it to win me over, which it did by the end. And especially in the days after I watched it, when I thought about it some more, because culturally it became not cool to watch The Big Chill or to like The Big Chill.
Right.
So I never, being not there in 83, I was 1 year old. It was
Oh, it hurts.
like in High
It hurts.
Fidelity, it was like top 5 Stevie Wonder songs or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's immediately disqualified because it was in The Big Chill. Or
Yeah,
no, you can't always get what you want. Was yeah, so it's like that, or there's a bunch of jokes like throughout pop culture where like The Big Chill became something to be embarrassed by.
But
And I
that's
think
so
that,
indicative, Adam.
yeah,
That's so indicative of Gen X culture. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like Gen X culture dismissing boomer culture through The Big Chill, like that, because High
yeah,
Fidelity is such a time capsule. That such an interesting sort of way to look at it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Whereas, like by the time like like Zoomers come around, and The Big Chill would be like something that they would be all about, probably in a different context. You know what I mean, like that circular nature of um the way the generations respond to each other, the way which generation is antagonistic to which generation, and all that.
but I did end up liking the movie a lot, especially after the credits rolled and I had time to think about it a bit, because the stuff that really kind of stuck out to me was so the character who commits suicide at the beginning of the movie, who we never see, that was played by Kevin Costner, who became friends or collaborators with Lawrence Kasdan. He was sort of cast in Silverado, I heard, as like a make good for never showing him in The Big
Yeah.
Chill. So that's great, and they continue to work together. They were on Wyatt Earp together and everything. But I was fascinated by the whole Vietnam or not Vietnam angle of it, because it seems like there's a lot of characters in that group who are sort of untouched by the war, other than in activist type of ways. And William Hurt is deeply, um, changed,
Oh, very deeply
very
changed.
deeply changed. And one thing I do like about the movie is it doesn't always underline what's going on with these people. They give you just enough, but you kind of have to think about it a little bit to really kind of understand the full grasp of it. And one thing I thought was interesting was they were talking about Kevin Costner's character and like how he was this scholar, a physics whiz, could have done whatever he wanted in life, but then became kind of this wayward guy. And they don't say until the end of the movie like about his induction letter, and then you kind of think it's just like, oh, he came back lost from the war, and that probably is why he ended up the way that he did, and only William Hurt kind of understands that.
Yeah.
And I found that like really very deeply moving. It snuck up on me because I didn't really put it all together until after the movie was over.
Yeah. I mean, I had not really noticed until my most recent viewing that William Hurt's actually a little older than the rest of the crew, because
Yeah.
he's come back for his doctorate after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really meaningful to think that he hooks in with this group of slightly younger students who consider themselves world-changing revolutionaries
Yeah.
after what he had just gone through. And I think it's also really significant that Chloe, his young girlfriend, is the only one apparently who has ever heard that Alex was sometimes sorry he passed on that big, grant or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and had regrets about that. And it probably would have kept him out of the war if he'd continued to be a scholar under this
Yeah.
grant. Instead, he ended up the way he did and maybe regretted it. And so I think, this whole concept of the idealism of youth is, to me, kind of ageless and generationless, because
Yeah.
every generation experiences that in their own way. And I think the boomer generation just it hit that boomer generation so hard because the dichotomy between their parents' generation and what they were allowed to do and what they were allowed to say was so different that freedom of saying it kind of went to their heads. And they thought, we're gonna not just improve the environment, or I don't know what the younger generations imagine themselves doing now, but that generation really imagined themselves changing the world.
Right.
And then they get out and find out, well, maybe the world doesn't really want to be changed.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a whole lot easier to let the world change you.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and it definitely does. And the films of the 80s, like if anything, like it was a real picture of like upward mobility and consumerism and class and everything like that. And The Big Chill definitely feels that way, where it's like it's lip service a little bit when they're reminiscing, only because they're together about, we should have done this, we should have stuck to our laurels, but they seem pretty happy with their lives, like, and their
The doctor,
luxuries.
the lawyer, the famous
Little,
writer, famous actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, they seem pretty happy about it.
These guys seem okay. These folks seem okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like existential by proximity, but once they all separate, they're gonna go right back to being fine with their, cars and houses and everything.
Yeah.
I was thinking today, because I did, and I have to admit, like, this is my first time seeing the Big Chill, and the first half hour or so, I was pretty hard on it. I was like, oh, this is some okay boomer shit, man. Like we gotta just like get over ourselves, guys. Come on, what are we doing? But I do think that the movie does, speaking to what you both were just talking about in terms of, the war and the self-awareness. And I think I was actually thinking this morning, as I was thinking more about the movie, I was seeing a lot of parallels, oddly enough, with Bodies, 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 where there's a self-awareness that doesn't become apparent until late in the game. And I think within, it's not quite, I mean, Bodies, 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 much more sort of, there's a harder edge to that movie. But in terms of speaking to a generational preoccupation and sort of using it against the audience for a while, and then looping it back in and creating that sort of self-awareness, as you guys said, kind of like, no, we kind of know that they're a little self-involved. We know they're, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies does it in a huge way, like it drops a hammer in the third act of the movie, where it's like, no, we know what we're doing here. We know that these characters are ridiculous. The Big Chill, it's a little bit more subtle, but I do think that befits the style. Like I do think that befits the generation, that there be something that would slowly creep upon them over the course of maybe a little self-involved whining, a little bit of that. But gradually they get to it and go like, oh, I see what's been missing, and I see how I've contributed to that in my own way.
And there's stuff in it to give shit. Like, I'll say this, like this, I had a real Dan in real life moment during this movie. And when I say that, it's Dan in real life has like the family talent show as part of like the weekend together.
Yeah.
And me being a person who did not grow up in a household that did family talent shows was just like, what universe is this? And then like when I'm watching The Big Chill, it's like Glenn Close telling Kevin Kline, go impregnate Mary Kay Place. And I'm just like, this is some real West Coast stuff, because like I do not understand any situation where this could be like kind of okay, especially in the span of a night.
I loved when they were just, because there really is, like, there are scenes in this movie where they're all sitting around in a circle and it's like heaven. It's like, oh God, I love watching these people talk. Like I love watching these people, like, because it's like I was telling Adam, like it's like watching like Muppet Babies. Like you recognize all the characters, but they're 30 years younger, so they're all little babies. So you can see Baby Goldblum and Baby Hurt and all these guys.
So what was your favorite performance in the movie?
Yeah.
Okay, me, Kevin Kline. I think he has a hard job. To me, he's the one who has stayed closest to who he probably was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, he's become rich, but he's made it with this, doing it with this fitness thing that he was obviously part of his life then, still part of his life. You see him in the background, they're all eating pancakes, he's making himself a smoothie. So he runs every day. He did make his money off something he really believed in and still believes in.
Mhm.
But he's also like the most, like when he gets mad at William Hurt after the cop brings him home, I think that's hard. You have
Yeah.
to be believable in both, in sort of, he rides that line between his old life and his new life the best.
To me, it's Meg Tilly because she just rules.
Yes,
It's
so
just,
good. I think it would be really easy to write her character off as just sort of a dumb,
no, she's so
but
important.
that's a mistake. She really brings depth to it.
She's so important in the movie. I think the fact that they underestimate her is
Exactly.
telling on them and telling on her as well.
I'll go with Tom Berenger because I've been a fan of his, but like I sort of followed him from Platoon onwards, and I had in my mind a sort of jocular, like tough guy, psycho sometimes type of dude. And I joked to Rob, I said, "This is a Tom Carringer, not a Tom Scaringer," and I'm just like. And I just watched Eddie and the Cruisers for the first time today, and he's similarly like, benevolent in that movie and stuff like that. So like I just really like that side of him. And I think he's definitely giving like a Costner Don Johnson type of performance, which is like not something that he was asked to do all that often afterwards. And then also shout out to Kevin Costner, who does so much with so little in this. So I asked both of you kind of at the top before we started recording what your favorite song from the soundtrack is. Jan, why don't you go ahead first?
I am surprised to hear myself saying The Weight.
Oh
One
yeah.
of those songs I always really like listening to, and I'd kind of forgotten it was part of this whole Motowny vibe. And it's pretty cheesy the way they use Grapevine, but at the time it was like, ooh, we get it.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cheesy, but I gotta, as far as how it's used in the movie, I think it's kind of fun, that opening with Heard It Through the Grapevine.
Yeah, Grapevine's been stuck in my head since I watched the movie yesterday.
Right? It's a great song.
Speaking of which, like, yeah, Motown was so big in the 80s that they marketed cartoon raisins to children singing Motown. I'll go with Whiter Shade of Pale
Oh, it's a
because
great song.
it's just such a vibe, that song. And then also this movie could have been called A Whiter Shade of Pale because it is the whitest movie ever.
All right, so my question to you guys was, who is the cast of the modern Big Chill? Who is today's, like, who are the the Hurts and the Goldblums and the Glenn Closes and so on of today? Adam, I know you got something.
All right, so name a Big Chill cast member, and I'll give you the proxy.
William Hurt.
For William Hurt, I went with James McAvoy.
Nice.
Okay.
I'm trying to pick actors who first became popular 15 years ago.
Okay. All right. Give me your Mary Kay Place.
Hilary Swank.
Hilary Swank.
Wow.
Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Jan, you jump in, whatever, but I'm just gonna keep going. Give me your Kevin Kline.
Justin Long.
Ooh.
Oh wow. I'd see Justin Long more as almost more as the, no, I don't know.
So you don't?
I don't know. I don't know. So I guess I guess you're perfect.
Berenger.
Berenger, I went with Gerard Butler.
Ooh.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right, Goldblum.
Goldblum, I went with Michael Cera.
Yeah, that I can definitely see.
I can see that.
Nobody wants to sleep with him, but he's
yeah, I was
amazing.
about to say, speaking of which, who's the Meg Tilly? Who's the Meg Tilly analog? It's got to be
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Oh wow, yeah. Now
Um,
that's spot on.
Yeah.
All right, Glenn Close,
Keira Knightley,
Keira Knightley, and then Joe Beth Williams.
Natalie Portman.
Natalie Portman.
Oh, sure.
Did you do a Richard?
I did not do a Richard.
Okay, all right.
Um,
Curious. And when it was anybody else? I
Oh.
miss anybody major?
Who
I had Costner
the-
was Seth
Oh.
Rogen.
Your costume is Seth Rogen. That's
Because
awesome.
you need
Okay,
somebody that
he
you
doesn't
feel a
get to
great
be in the
loss for
movie.
that would bring people together. I do want to touch on one thing. I like the movie much more than I like the poster for The Big Chill. The poster for The Big Chill looks like either a placemat, like for a table setting, or like a Diesel cardboard cutout for Thanksgiving instead of Halloween.
So generationally, I said I do identify pretty much as a baby boomer, partly because my parents were World War II.
Right.
Mm.
So even though I was at the very end of the baby boom, I definitely was raised by parents of baby boomers, right? So what generation would you guys identify as for starts?
Adam.
I mean, I definitely fall in millennial,
Mhm.
but I don't feel temperament wise like a millennial. I feel more temperament wise like Gen X, but
Adam's. Yeah,
I'm
Adam's
I'm
young
so like tied to my phone and things like that like I millennial definitely is a big part of me, but I roll my eyes at a lot of millennial things.
Yeah, I'm 86, so I'm prime millennial age. I'm basically right there.
Yeah.
And I feel much more. I feel millennial, and it's also just being a teacher and teaching,
Right.
teaching Zoomers and seeing. I mean, now realizing like, oh, there's a marked generational difference. Like in my first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of teaching, it was like, I'm not that much older than my students. You know what I mean? Like I'm still. Now I'm like a full generation older than them. I'm like, oh, you kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you feel probably like you stay the same and they just keep getting younger and younger.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Was baby boomer the last generation raised with this message of our parents' entire goal was to make our lives better than their lives had been? So we were taught like
Right.
from infancy, a baby boomer was raised by having their parents say, I just want a better life for you than I had. I want you to have it better than me. And it happened.
Right.
And
Well,
I'm
I think that's the key is the second part, which
Yeah.
is
is
that it happened, right? So
Yeah.
I think we might be the last generation that it was actually able to happen for. And
Yeah.
so a lot of that whining and disillusionment comes from that privilege.
Right.
I definitely felt like when I was growing up, my parents wanted me to surpass them, sort of. However, I felt sort of, and I didn't realize this until I was well into my 30s, I felt trapped by that vision, not by them, but I decided for myself that's what success is. And the fact that I didn't follow those steps made me feel like a failure. And I had to kind of learn to make peace with that's not what I really wanted. So,
Right.
yeah. So The Big Chill, Jan, thank you for the recommendation. Thank you for joining us. You will be
Thank you
back
for
with us
chilling.
very soon.
This was a big
Love it.
chill. This
It
was
was.
a,
I
Yeah, it was
chilled
a big chill. Yeah,
with you guys.
yeah, yeah. If they remade this year, it would be on Zoom. Uh, Anyways, we got to wrap up. But thank you, everybody. Enjoy F This Movie Fest week. Enjoy F This Movie Fest day. We love you. Until next time.
everybody chill.
The seats are reserved.
Seats reserved.
Love you guys.
Bye, everyone. Love you.
And